So let's talk about the Sony RX1R Mark III, because it doesn't seem like it was something that Sony purposely tried to release. What's up, you guys? This is Devin with CFXTV, back with another video, and today we're talking about the Sony RX1R Mark III. Now, these camera names get on my nerves, but if I make a mistake about the camera names, please forgive me. Let's get started. Sony just released this camera, the RX1R and Mark III, and it really didn't make a big splash in the whole camera community. The camera community nowadays, it's like you gotta send it to the creators, you gotta send it to the content creators, you gotta send it to all the people that are Sony endorsers, Sony ambassadors. I think they call them Sony artisans of light, and Sony takes people out to these faraway places to go photograph and show off their new cameras, so then they can make it on their YouTube channel and it can make it on other people's YouTube channel, and they make all these commercials. And usually when a camera that's especially over $3,500, a camera company is going to make a big splash about it. They're gonna announce, they're gonna say, hey, come and buy our camera, especially for a camera like this, but they did not do that this go around. Now, the Sony RX1R Mark III has two other variants, the Mark I and the Mark II. Now, the Mark I came out in 2013, it was announced in 2012, and the Mark II came out in 2015. Now, 2012 is all the way back in the likes of the DSLR days. DSLRs like the 5D Mark III came out around that time. The 6D Mark I came out in that time. And this is the time where Canon was really popular for that DSLR video. Sony needed to make their mark because Sony, not too long before, had bought Minolta, and they were coming out with cameras that people weren't really buying them in competitive numbers. People were buying Nikons and Canons. It was Nikon versus Canon, and Canon had won over the market in the early 90s, early 2000s, late 90s, excuse me. And one of the things you need to understand about Canon is Canon has always had the bulk, if not the most market share throughout that entire period. Even right now, Sony is still competing with Canon for the market share. That leads me to believe that they came out with this camera and they didn't do it quite the way they wanted to. We also have to give Sony their credit. This is a unique camera and they might want to go about, I guess, promoting it a different way. The RX1R Mark III, the Mark II, and the Mark I are all unique cameras. They are the first fixed lens camera, which means you can't take off the lens. But don't worry, you have a vulnerable 35mm f2 Zeiss Sonar lens, and f2 is pretty fast. 35mm is a nice walk around focal length. So if you were doing street photography, you'd be good. But I wouldn't use this for too many portraits. I wouldn't use this for any sports. So it's definitely a niche camera body on a camera lens. Now, since you can't change the lens, then you're stuck at that focal length for the entire life of the camera. And for a camera that's $5,000 plus, that's a steep price to pay, but that's not what Sony's trying to do. They're not trying to get you to purchase in large numbers a RX1R Mark III. This is reserved for the people who have the money. This is like the Rolls Royce. It's like the Rolls Royce of Sony cameras, so to speak. The specs aren't anything spectacular. For example, we have a 61 megapixel camera. This 61 megapixel camera has a low burst rate. It also only has 4K 30. So you're not trying to compete with the A1. You're not trying to compete with any A7R cameras. You're not trying to compete with the A7CR. But for a large majority of the market, these cameras are choices that can be interchanged because the prices are around the same. Now, these might be bodies alone, like for example, the A1 body alone might be somewhere around, $5,000. Now, if it's the A1 Mark II, which is Sony's flagship, the A1 series in total is, Sony's flagship, that comes around $6,000 to $6,500 depending on when you purchase it, whether it's used or new. So it's really floating around the price market of the A7R series and the A7CR series, where those cameras somewhere top out around $4,000. Then you pair it with a good lens, you might be ending up paying the same amount as the RX1R Mark III. Its first version started in 2012. This is a long time ago. The second variation came out 3 years afterwards, which means that it came out in a reasonable camera cycle. Usually Canon uses about a 4-year cycle. Nikon uses about a 4-year cycle for all their major cameras, 3 years for their less major cameras. So it came out around the right cycle when it came to going from the Mark I to the Mark II. But that Mark III came out 10 years later, which is right now in July. And it's like, okay, well, why would Sony wait so long to come out with a camera, even if it's a camera that's not supposed to be purchased by the masses? Only the select few, the richer people who want that aesthetic, that feel, that go around, walk around with this camera kind of feel. Like, they want the status symbol of all of it. So it leads me to believe, like I said before, that they just came out with this, I want to say, just haphazardly. I would think that if I were running a company like a massive electronics company like Sony, where they have a big camera department, they have a big electronics department, that once I start putting R&D, research and development, into a project like the RX1R, which is a very niche camera that doesn't come out a lot, I'm probably going to have unique parts, especially the body's going to be unique. It's going to look different, but it's worth a lot of money. So once I start putting stuff in there, it's hard to take back because this is a camera that's unique and it's probably not going to have the same parts in it that other cameras have. There's not too many cameras on the market in general that have 61 megapixels. Canon has no cameras above 50 megapixels. And I'm not sure about Nikon. I don't think Nikon has any 61 megapixel cameras as well. So that part is unique in and of itself, but Sony has a few cameras that they can recycle from, but not everything can be recycled. For example, video specs. You can't really recycle video specs. You can tone it down some, but this is not a camera that we're going to be shooting 8K and 6K with. The market for this camera is not going to want an unbalanced, power-hungry, overheating camera like the R5 is, like the R6 Mark I is, like the R5C is, and like a lot of the Nikon Z series are. A lot of these cameras, since their form factor does not provide a lot of space for ventilation and stuff like that, when they start doing these higher video codecs and these faster frame rates and these big resolution 6K, 8K, it overheats the cameras. And I was surprised that this camera even has 61 megapixels. Now, if you're trying to compete within your camera market, like with the A7Rs and the A7CRs and your A1s and your A9s, if you were trying to compete with those cameras at that price level, I would have put this unique camera at like 100 megapixels, because a lot of these newer Fujifilm and medium format cameras are having higher and higher megapixels, and they kind of stand on the plateau all on their own in a sense. You don't use them typically for sports. You don't use them typically for DSLR or mirrorless type work. So if I was Sony, I would have made this camera a 100 megapixel variation. It wouldn't be a high burst rate. It would have all types of different JPEG flavors, so people wouldn't have to shoot at 100 megapixels. It would have a compressed RAW. It would be manageable, but it would be there because a lot of people still are on the race for 100 megapixels. Unlike Canon, Canon seems to be the lower megapixel king right now with the 24 megapixel sensor, but hopefully they'll bring up their megapixel count, just like they're bringing the megapixel count up on their video. They seem to have 8K video, but only 45 megapixel stills. So in my whole grand scheme of talking about the RX1R, it's about how Sony presented it to the public. Usually Sony has pretty decent reasons for why they release cameras. Canon is known as the cripple brand. For example, Camera Conspiracies came out with the Cripple Hammer. And the Cripple Hammer is just saying that Canon will give you specs on one camera, but not give you specs on another camera, or it'll be in an iteration of a camera and it won't be in the next iteration of that camera. For example, the 80D, the 70D, the 90D, they all have mode dial locks. But and they're crop frame sensor cameras, which means they're the cheaper variation of the full frame cameras. Now, if you go to a full-frame mirrorless camera, I don't think not one of Canon's new full-frame mirrorless cameras have a mode dial lock. And we're still experiencing issues that we had with the 60D. The 5Ds that had the rotary dial mode dial, it's just a mess. But I say all that to say, if Sony's going to compete with this new camera, they're going to really have to make some strides in firmware or they're just gonna have to put this out and focus on something different. And that's really what I think Sony's gonna do at the end of the day. They pushed this camera out because they were busy putting in R&D in this project, and they was like, we really have to get this out. We're too deep into this RX1R Mark III, and I don't think there's a market for it, so we won't give it out to the content creators, but we'll just put it out for the people who are expecting it to come out. Bang, because we've already put enough R&D in it over this last 10 years. We need to focus on other things because Canon right now is projected to come out with a R7 Mark II, an R6 Mark III, and maybe another camera, and it's in the rumor mills and it's getting very hot. So we might need to be putting a lot of this effort into another camera because this camera will not keep us in the minds of the public. It won't keep you in the content creators' ears a lot. Matter of fact, I don't talk about Sony at all, but I just thought it was a very interesting thing to talk about today, and it's kind of not helping Sony. So think about it in that regard. For a $5,000 camera on a fixed lens at 35 millimeters, obviously this is pointing to only a certain sector of the market, and it's not to compete with the cameras that they have already. It's not even to compete with Canon or Nikon or even Panasonic or any of those other cameras. I'm Devin with Century FX Studios TV. What do you think about the Sony RX1R Mark III? Are you picking one up? If you are picking one up, tell me exactly what are you gonna use it for? Street photography, is it a lifestyle thing? Because you're pushing $6,000 after taxes, and I'm really curious. Links in the description below on how you can support the channel. Comment, like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.